The proceeding will start shortly.
16 Sound.
Order, and welcome to today's session of the Transport Select Committee, where we are continuing our inquiry on the use of data and AI, and in particular today looking at the logistics sector. Before we begin, if I could ask each of the panellists for our records just to introduce yourself and your organisation, please. Start with you, Chris.
Morning, my name's Chris Shirling-Rooke. I'm the Chief Exec of Maritime UK.
Thank you.
Morning, my name's Ben Garratt. I'm Deputy Director of Public Affairs and Innovation Lead at Logistics UK.
Thank you.
Good morning, my name's Steve Freeman, Chairman of RailX.
Thank you. We're very grateful for you appearing before us and giving us your benefit of your experience. If I could start with a fairly general question and invite each of you just to give us an overview as to how the use of data and related technology has changed operations in the sector over the last decade or so, and what changes you see coming on the horizon. Ben, perhaps
happy
start
to
with
go
you.
first. Thank you. So I guess the context is logistics is now an incredibly data-driven sector focused on customer service and efficiency and safety, largely using data for those purposes. And I guess the biggest transformation that we'll have all experienced in terms of how data has transformed logistics is in the space of e-commerce. When we use our mobile phones to order goods, the goods you can track them when they're on their way to you and they arrive on time. That's been a huge shift. Previous to that, I said the technology changes affecting logistics where there's a lot of them in the sort of infrastructure and cargo management side. But the last decade or more has been very data driven. And what's next? The automation agenda is one that all logistics businesses are talking about. There's lots of layers of logistics where that might impact, from automation within warehouses to fleet management approaches. So that will increase. The logistics sector needs to sort of establish what and how to invest in those transformations, and then beyond that, automation in actual vehicle movements in terms of autonomous vehicles is something the sector is very interested in, but we're not quite there yet.
Thank you. We'll want to dig into some of those issues in detail shortly, but Chris, if you could, from your side of the sector.
I suspect you'll be hearing a lot of similar answers from all three of us, because just outside there we were actually discussing how similar some of the challenges and opportunities our respective sectors are. What I would probably add to Ben's comments is the people angle of the use of data and how it's improved safety, how it's improved security, and also the skills as well. Often we see data, we talk about AI and machine learning, etc., as a negative for skills. But the great thing is there's an incredible opportunity to create more jobs, different skills, in certainly in the maritime sector, and we've seen a leaning towards that. So again, I echo everything Ben said, and you're seeing a focus on people.
Thank you. And Steve?
I agree with my colleagues here. I think that the other thing that I would say is that the industry, and I hope I'm not upsetting any industry colleagues here, but the industry is fragmented. There's no doubt about that. If you look at rail, which is my main area of interest, and the road in part of the industry, there's some fragmentation there. So there's a tendency for companies, groups, to go off and start developing their own data. I think what we ought to be striving for is a single truth. So some data points and accessible data points that we can gather a single truth from. So it's about collaboration, I think, across the sector, and more of it.
Yes, and we'll want to explore the fragmentation side of it in more detail. But just to give us try and place the changes in context, how would you quantify the economic gain from the greater use of data? In terms, what cost savings has it led to? How more efficient is it now than it was, say, 10 years ago?
I think it's perhaps easier to look at particular examples. I'm not able to answer on a sort of macro level of efficiency. We produced a report with Oxford Economics last year that included several case studies on the use of innovation and other investments to improve logistics. And as an example, one of those case studies was about the use of data to improve vehicle turnaround times at port terminals. So HGVs coming in, unloading, loading, getting out again. A data-led approach there managed to reduce those vehicle turnaround times by 50%. That means that vehicle is then able to be better used as an asset across the network rather than sort of be caught up in inefficient turnaround moments, as an example.
Steve or Chris, do you have any?
Yeah, again, I can just touch upon that and do the kind of maritime bit. So if you think about the better use of data to really simplify it, you can better control how much fuel a ship is burning. If you have more data, so you're having less impact with greenhouse gases, you can better tell BENS members, and I'm simplifying it, when a ship is coming in. So actually BENS members aren't standing around, aren't idle, can come in and pick up the boxes and the goods and take them elsewhere. So to simplify it, you are seeing real differences of being able to get hold of data, because it's about data and then doing something with that data. I think often the question is, well, what are we doing with that data and why are we doing it? And undoubtedly there's a huge opportunity to drive down cost of food, drive down cost of fuel, as importantly as all of those, reduce our greenhouse gases. And this is something that as an industry we've been driving towards, but we can certainly do more, and having this interconnectivity is certainly a key part of that.
Thank you. And Steve?
Yeah, just add, I think the word I would use is efficiencies as well. So one of the things that we're witnessing through our business is by filling space on trains, taking more lorries off longer distance journeys, it's providing more efficiencies to the freight operating companies on the rail side, filling their space for them, and greater efficiencies for the customers that are tracking their cargo, whether it be from sea, across land, and right to their door. So it's about efficiencies as well as cost savings, I think.
And Chris, you mentioned the gain for lowering carbon emissions. Do you have a specific target in mind? Because there's a wider argument about using cleaner technologies, but if you just look at the potential gain to be achieved.
Yeah, I think with those new technologies, it's going to all be about data, and that actually drives investment. So I know that actually for our sector, we produce about 3% of the UK's greenhouse gases. We're incredibly efficient on moving stuff. 95% of everything that comes to the UK comes on a boat. We're incredibly efficient, but we know that we have a responsibility to really drive those environmental changes, and that won't be able to be done without data.
Yeah. And where in the sort of logistics chain are the potentially greatest efficiencies to be achieved?
So I was,
excuse me.
I think if I was thinking about data sharing logistics businesses in terms of vertical data sharing, so within your own supply chain between you and your customers, and using data to deliver improvements there. There's a lot of that happening because it doesn't challenge commercial confidentiality. It's horizontal data sharing, so thinking about competitors essentially sharing data and looking at things in different ways, which brings with it competition challenges. And then there's the whole piece around data sharing with the public realm, so between logistics or multiple logistics companies or individual large companies and the infrastructure that they're using, whether that's road or rail or energy. I think there's been a huge amount of progress in the first space and sort of vertical space and making your operation as efficient as possible. On the second and the third, I think it's around finding common challenges that agree between the public sector and the private sector where data can help. But my instinct is the greatest benefit is in that interface with the public realm. So enabling logistics and the infrastructure it uses, whether that's transport and energy, to be much more efficient in how journeys are planned, for example, or above that in what infrastructure is built in the first place based on data.
Yeah, I would echo that as well. It's really important. I think the other area which is really important about particularly carbon savings, and I would say this, wouldn't I? It's about taking some of the longer getting lorries off the road, putting them onto trains, because the carbon savings are immediate. It's not like planting a tree where you get the reduction in 20 years' time. It's an immediate reduction, and we're finding increasingly that our customers are looking for that as part of the package now. It's not just about prices. Clearly, that's an important element of it, but it is about carbon reduction. And the use of data can provide that information for our customers to make sensible decisions.
Thank you. Mick, you wanted?
Yes, just to ask Steve a question. It's great to see, like, you're getting freight onto rail, which will reduce the carbon situation. But the likes of, you say the West Coast line, it's the capacity, now it's completely capacitized. So therefore, we can't put too much more freight on there, or it's going to take longer and longer and longer. They're going to have to park the freight up. Yeah, to allow the passengers.
You're absolutely right. There are capacity issues across the rail network, undoubtedly. There are solutions to some of those capacity issues. But if I were to tell you that something like if you look at the 80 or so intermodal trains that run around our system every day, each one of them has got an average of about 20-25% empty space on them. So what we ought to be doing is filling the trains that we've got. Then we've got the ability to make them longer trains as well. So it's not about adding more trains necessarily to the system. That will come in time, hopefully. But it is about making the best use of the system that we've got and the capacity that we've got.
You want to carry on with your...
Yeah. I'd just like to ask the panel there, what are the biggest gaps in available data in the logistics industry, and how could these be addressed? Chris?
I wonder if data isn't the problem, because there's so much data, and I'll seek more advice from my panelists, but there's so much data out there. There's data everywhere. It's actually getting a sort of conurbation of that data and saying, okay, now what do we do with it? From a maritime point of view, we're an incredibly well-run and competitive industry. So things are coming to port, to shipping lines, and they're all producing data. And undoubtedly, there is a challenge to centralise or anonymise that data. But then when you have it, then what do we do with it? And that is actually some interesting questions we're working through currently, actually with the DFT and other partners. But I don't think it's a lack of data.
No, I would agree. I think Chris is spot on there. I think there's a lack of understanding about the data that's out there, and there's also a lack of understanding about what the costs are involved in identifying that data and using it, creating the intelligence that you need to drive the business forward and the sector forward. I think are key. By driving, because data can help you drive efficiencies in the business, in the sector. But Chris is absolutely right that there's plenty of data out there, but it is finding that one truth for each sector of piece of data that we've got. There's a lot of variations of data. Take carbon reduction data, for example. There's a lot of ways of calculating that. What we need is some collaboration, I think, to find that one truth so that we're all singing from the same hymn sheet, as it were.
I would add that there's a public data dimension to it as well. There's a huge amount of data collected by Department for Transport, Network Rail, National Highways, ONS, others. It's not always it's not necessarily aggregated in the way that would necessarily help inform key decisions for our sector. Some of the challenges around the way the data is collected, that it's not sort of cut by public transport and logistics. It's cut by mode, and some of those are mixed. But it's also a challenge around potentially the lack of, at a very broad level, strategic objectives at national transport level that would then help inform how you wanted to corral that data into something very understandable. You can sort of take a data-first approach and sort of there's a risk of getting lost in it, or an objectives-focused approach, which then you work out what data you need to achieve those objectives. And that second approach potentially also overcomes some of the competition challenges of data sharing within the sector, because you know what you're aiming for, and you can then be thinking about what aggregating data at a level that doesn't impact competition but does answer the essay question. So then start from the sort of objective or essay question end, it can bear more fruit.
Just a quick supplementary, Chair. What's your opinion on the Maritime 2050 report?
I'm a big fan. I think so. This was the 2019 industry and DFT report that came out. I think it's a good document. I think it'd be really interesting to see the next iteration, what that might look like. But as far as an industry is concerned, the maritime industry, it's the first time post-war that we'd actually, had a sort of clear direction of travel. And again, a lot of the questions that have been asked by this committee over the last 12 or 18 months, they all stem from Maritime 2050. So I'm a huge fan. There's a sort of crib sheet for the industry that you can easily, people can understand it, and the industry can understand it. I'm a big fan.
Thanks, Chair. Yep. Where to start? Just picking up, I think probably from some of the things that have just been discussed in terms of the complexity of the industry in the different modes that are there and the fragmentation that sits within it. You talked about the data being available, okay, but it's about then using it, isn't it? And it's about, is there a need to create some sort of, sector-wide approach to developing how data is used or how technology is provided to enable the usage of data? Is it something that needs to be sector-led? Is that sector road, rail, maritime, air, everything? Where do you draw the line? Where do you put the boxes to get data that you can actually make meaningful and useful and get some real value out of? Start with yourself then, yeah.
We tend to view things but at sort of logistics-wide level, so seek to not avoid being modal if we can, and look at things that across the whole system. And that's partly about where the sector is moving to, in that there are many businesses in the sector that sort of span all modes. The document that we look to a lot, which is the Future of Freight Plan from the Department for Transport 2022 that the sector fed into, and that's got some really key ambitions in it. On the kind of infrastructure side of things, which I think there is a lot of role for data to inform, there is an aspiration to identify the national freight network. So identify where the key flows are, and use that to then inform future investment strategies. Identifying the key flows between international gateways and key hubs and cities is a data-based exercise. The data is, gathered in the right way by the department, maybe with a bit of sort of sector input back and forth, is there. It's just a case of maintaining the focus on delivering that objective. It hasn't happened yet. Potentially there are concerns of speculating on, once something is identified as a need, the question then becomes about what's the investment that's going to go in to deliver it. But we think there would be a significant benefit in going down that road. Another aspect of the Future of Freight Plan is all about innovation, and led to the Freight Innovation Fund, which the Connected Systems Catapult administers, and there's a lot of that takes a challenge-based approach. So rather than a modal-based approach, it might look at a particular challenge. For instance, improving the interconnectivity between two different types of modes, and what's the role of technology can play in that, and then that attracts investment and interest from tech companies in that, and is potentially resolved. I think that's quite a good approach, because it enables the sort of focusing of data and technology on pain points and resolving pain points to make the system work better, rather than necessarily sort of taking a modal approach and trying to solve everything at once.
Okay, just before I bring the rest of the panel in on that, I just want you to check a specific on that, just on the very last point you're there about trying to solve problems, if you like. I've got a logistics company in my patch called Stillers, and they do tremendous work. They're at the top end of their game, in my opinion. And I was a logistics director, so I've got at least a sense of their space. And I asked them what sort of data opportunities should come. And the sort of example again, he said, well, look, if you're looking way out into the future, then you've got electric HGVs. If you had electric HGVs, they're going to have huge charging points, times, and things like this. And therefore, just like I've got an electric an EV, and I drive and you look to see where the charging points are. It's even more critical if you're into that sort of space. And what he was asking really was, is there something that would come through, whether it's Google Maps, whether it's Waze or something like that, that takes live and predicted traffic conditions and where the charging points are and everything else, that would then feed into some sort of data pool that would make it more efficient for charging, for the hauliers that are moving around the system. And it goes, just in terms of your public versus sector data, if you like, that would seem to me, that sort of exercise, to be particularly relevant for your smaller operators who are trying to tag into this, so you not get disadvantaged by the pool of data that sits for the big boys that nobody else gets their hands on.
Absolutely. I'd say there's in that space a challenge before that, which is where to put the charging points. If we're thinking about HGVs, they don't operate in the same way as cars. They work often on very planned journeys, hence we were talking about journey planning. And there's a connection between identifying the national freight network and identifying the key infrastructure needs of charging, or if the answer is some kind of fueling approach rather than charging, where to put those sites, and then what grid upgrades need to be delivered to enable that. So there's a kind of data-led infrastructure approach first, but then yes, absolutely. Journey planning is key, as you know, to logistics, and being able to see where there is availability would significantly help with that. Something we hear from our members quite a lot, not in the electric HGV space because the sort of sector isn't quite there yet, although they are, those that are involved in the ZHID trials are very much looking forward to getting on that road and then going through a process of optimization and thinking about what, how they can optimize their journeys and what more data they can need. But those in the electric van space are talking about the need for booking. So to be able to book ahead for your charging point, so you can plan that into a journey, because the system has been a bit sort of automotive-led or car-led. It doesn't have that booking ability. So that could be significant. Again, another data approach is seeing where it is, seeing if it's available, but also being able to secure your spot would be very valuable.
No, thanks, Ben. Eve, Chris, build on the initial question?
I think I'd add to that to answer your original question, it does need to be cross-sector led, I think, the approach, for all the reasons that Ben's just described and you've alluded to. And that is that, there with the new technology that's coming on, whether it be hydro or electric, there are distance challenges as Ben has just described. And I think that's where cross-sector, the industry can work together to get the right answers, to use the data to funnel the investment in the right places. Whether it be road or whether it be rail, there's a journey there for both to work together. This is not road versus rail or rail versus road.
Can I just throw two other points in just for you to consider as you're developing the answers? Yeah. One is whether you think there's any role that government should play in some of this stuff. But on the other hand, you've talked twice now where you've talked between road and rail. Yeah. We did a recent committee trip where we went to Japan and looked at what they did. They have a serious, and that's terminology now, there's basically local shipping that goes around, like historically we would have taken ships from the Tyne to the Thames. And is that sector underutilised? Is that a sector with more data? We shouldn't just be talking road to rail.
No, absolutely.
We should be talking maybe road to rail to ship as to where it's, because we talk about capacity on railways. There's not that much capacity problems on the sea. There might be more need for ships, but
you're absolutely right. And we did some experiments. I used to, until recently, I ran iPort Rail in Doncaster, and we did some short train journeys between iPort Rail, it's only 40 miles, and the ports of Hull and Immingham, in an attempt to try and persuade some of the shipping that is running into Felixstowe and Southampton to come up the East Coast more, rather than run it across land. Let's use the East Coast ports, and we're in discussions with T-Sport about the same sorts of things. So I absolutely get what you're saying. We shouldn't miss out that opportunity.
So open the door for you.
Yeah, of course, that was a nice cross in there, so I can pop it in the goal. Of course, I'm going to say it's going to be about coastal shipping and inland waterways. And actually reminding ourselves that we used to do this. Is anyone a Peaky Blinders fan? So it's all about inland waterways, literally in the 1920s, and we've sort of forgotten how to do this, but we have the infrastructure, a lot of it there. I also think a big part that we need to remember are the skills. We can talk about any technology you like, but if we don't have the people and skills to do it, it's a problem. And when we're talking about the use of data, again, working with the DFT and one of our AI partners, we actually created it was a platform. It's an AI platform where we imagined, based on the Southwest, and if you're a youngster sitting at home and you thought, actually, I want to work in the offshore industry, how do I get qualified? And it's a living, breathing platform you could literally type in, and it will tell you all the live qualifications nationally. It'll tell you any bursaries that are involved. It'll talk to you about campuses. It will then tell you the jobs that are involved. And as soon as the whole idea of this is, it was live, using live data. So as soon as a university or college put something on the internet, it scraped it and it made it live. So there's different ways of thinking how we use data. Of course, you can probably tell we're very people-focused in Maritime, because we know we have an ageing maritime workforce. We know that fourth generation of our coastal communities tend to be unemployed. And the use of data is a real gateway to upskill and employ those boys and girls.
So you look like you wanted to come back again.
Yeah, well, on the role for government piece, absolutely. So I mentioned the Future of Freight plan. Helping to take that forward is the DFT's Freight Council, which is departmental. And
just before you continue, for me, there's two questions around government. One about any legislation that helps frame things as to where it is, but then the opportunity to drive or promote the innovation sector. So just the two pieces. And anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I'd say, well, I was thinking of a third area, which is about convening power. So this council I mentioned brings the sector and the government together to collaborate on how to take forward the strategy. Something that hangs underneath that is the Freight Energy Forum. So that's the sort of energy decarbonisation element of that broader work. Again, brings the government and the sector together. One of the things it's looking at is the gathering of data in a way that doesn't impact competition across the sector to establish where infrastructure like energy charging should go, or other things like that. On the technology side of things, government funds the Freight Innovation Fund. There's also government money that goes into autonomous vehicles trials. Currently, there's an interesting Space UK programme with government money on encouraging the logistics sector, or aiding the logistics sector to make more use of satellite data and imagery to improve journey planning or where to build assets and that sort of thing. So it's a very it's a collaborative space. I think it's important that it remains collaborative, with government playing its part and getting batch funding where appropriate from the private sector, sometimes from tech community and investors, not necessarily always from logistics, because logistics operates on small margins and it's better at offering a test bed than money. But there's a real role there for both for a public-private partnership essentially, and also both sides being sensitive to where the edges of that relationship are. On the skills side, completely agree. Another sort of a very different data sort of driven approach that the sector is working together on is the Generation Logistics campaign. and that is all about using social media and some other tools to get in front of young people thinking about their future careers and making sure they're aware of logistics roles. So that's sort of using data in a social media marketing sense, but also making them young people aware of, and career switchers, aware of role, the whole breadth of roles. So people have heard of some of the roles in logistics, driving, for example, but they haven't often heard of the more technology and data innovation the roles that might pique their interest in the sector. And given the rise of automation in logistics, there is a huge amount of that, a huge opportunity for really interesting new roles.
Anything to add before? I've got another question. Don't worry about it.
I was just going to answer your question about what government can do. I think we talked earlier, all of us, I think, about collaboration across the sector. I'm doubtful that without some government intervention that will happen. So some incentivisation through regulation or legislation that forces the industry together to come up with the logistics answer, the whole logistics answer that I think the country needs. So that we don't continue to work in silos, that we actually are brought together through some targeted legislation or regulation.
I think it might be just worth quickly reminding about Maritime UK and how we were sort of born and created as early as recently as 2016. And the whole idea of MUK was to be a convener, and it came from something called the Maritime Growth Study in 2016. And how do we get an industry that's so disparate, where we have ports and ships and leisure marine, and we have universities and professional services, etc., and how do we kind of get some common themes? So my membership tend to be, are the sort of national trade bodies, regional representatives. You mentioned Tees. We do an awful lot of work over there, up and down the country. And what we have been working recently with the department has been a focus on an AI task and finish group. What does that look like, actually? So we have pretty much an awful lot of the maritime sector covered through our members. Well, what are their members telling them, and how do we start to put that together? So there has been some interesting work on that. And of course, I'm always going to say, I think government intervention is always welcome where it's needed. Whilst maritime is a highly commercial and privatised industry, of course we're always going to welcome partners that'll meet us halfway. And we've seen this with the 206 million government gave us for the UK shore for innovation, tech, AI. It'd be nice if that had a zero on, but which I'm sure it will do. Of course it will. But I think government has a critical role to play in this.
I think it's always one of those things with government, isn't it, that you want them to get involved without getting to the stage of frustrating. And it's a careful balance there. As to where we go. Just another thing that came out of the Japan stuff that we did was one of the concepts they had was what they called a smart city, where they're actually taking a place and testing the integration of data, of both data use and different transport modes and things like that. Not necessarily taking a full smart city concept, but do you see any opportunities for doing, piloting schemes in that sort of way that show how things can be put together, or is it almost like going back to a big bang sort of thing? You either do it for everywhere or you don't do it. Is there opportunities to try and sense check? Seems like a good idea.
Yeah, so our members would come at it from a sort of like urban logistics angle, but in a very similar space, and thinking about what's the best way of optimising logistics in that urban environment. There are standard infrastructure sort of bottlenecks and issues in that. There are also sort of regulations that can inhibit logistics and that need looking at, but there's also technology and data-based approaches. On the technology side, it could be ways of joining up inland waterways and cargo bikes and bands, as an example. And on the data side of things, it could be gathering data from, this is something that Freight Innovation Fund has looked at, gathering data from, say, a large office building. Who is it? who are they buying, who's coming into the loading bay each day, who are they buying from, use that data internally to inform better buying decisions, which in turn enable logistics companies to be more efficient because they know their customer is making smart decisions on what they need and not necessarily everyone trying to get everything all at once from multiple companies. So there's lots of opportunity in that space. I think we've come across it more in the pilots and interesting examples space rather than whole city-wide approaches. But the other bit that I was conscious that it sort of butts up against is the kind of the patchwork of rules and regulations in the traditional sense that inhibit logistics in an urban environment. And I guess it would be unfortunate to make a significant investment and focus on data and technology-based approaches while also sort of on the analog side finding it difficult to find space to build the shed that is needed to switch between a cargo bike and a van, for example.
Okay. Just interestingly, you focused on the urban side. I mean, one of the things that I touched on regularly in this committee in different structures of discussions, the difference between urban and rural. It's in some ways, I would never, just using the public transport as an example, I would never look to see what time the tube train's coming. But if I'm going to try and get a bus from Trimdon to Sedgefield in my constituency, I do need to look because it's only coming once an hour. If you follow that metaphor into your world of logistics around the UK, then the physical situations of where charging points would be, where the different opportunities to connect and make sure things happen in the rural end is another question. Is there something that should be worked on, thought about to make sure you can get through the rural world to where you need to? And in the same sort of thought process, the smaller operators, I think I touched on this earlier, and making sure that they've got access to the data pools to make the decisions, to make sure that you've got new logistics coming through and it's not just going to be dominated forever by the companies that dominate it now. We all need innovation from the new thinkers as well.
Absolutely.
Maybe you want to start on this one, Steve?
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea of a smart city is a great concept, and I think where you've got the opportunity for a new build, you can do that. I would just be concerned, I think, about the level of investment that would be involved in doing something like that in this country at this time. But in principle, absolutely, I think it's the way forward. There's something very similar in the Middle East as well. I think in Abu Dhabi, Dubai.
Yes.
Which it's risen out of a brand new build. I think that's the challenge.
That was better.
Yeah, absolutely.
On the rural side of things, I mean, there's a technology challenge with that. I think sort of.
But it's a payback game as well, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
Your payback comes in the urban sections rather than the rural sections.
Yeah. But obviously, on the charging or other type of things, it sort of like opens that question about whether the diesel truck is a bit of a Swiss Army knife, and actually, future decarbonised approaches might be less flexible and more tailored. There's an angle there. There's also a customer buying behaviour angle. I think what we hear from a lot of our members is they want to, invest in innovation and decarbonisation. One of the challenges can be the outcome from that. If it's a public good, such as reduced emissions, it's hard to get the customer to pay for that. And as the agenda moves forward and in scope-free reporting, potentially becomes the norm, then you've potentially got customers who can see a benefit to their own approaches from different buying behaviour. I think that might be particularly appropriate in rural communities where you can see what the possibilities are and what the emissions could be of ordering something in a certain way, and you might order it in a slightly different way, potentially on a set day that was made available to you rather than just as soon as possible, and that could create a more informed interaction in the e-commerce space.
If I could just add, obviously the theory of smart ports has been around for quite a number of years, and when we think about infrastructure, we always think about new railheads, or we think about physical infrastructure. with imports. I think digital infrastructure is as important. So when you were mentioning there, how do we support the SMEs and micro businesses be part of this digital revolution? Well, we need to create digital nets in the areas that they're physically working, and it tends to be our coastal communities, in the sense that our coastal communities tend to be behind or as negatively affected by lack of digital access as our rural communities. It then links to better digital connectivity, you have more businesses moving in, jobs, etc. I also think we have a security question here as well. We're an island nation, food, fuel, a quarter of energy comes by sea. We need to control that data. So the data we are creating, we need to have absolute control over it. And I know certainly this is becoming far more prevalent as discussion topic, certainly in Maritime, with the global challenges that we're seeing. So we have lots of data, we can digitise, but we need to be aware, we need absolute control as a sovereign nation of that data.
No agree more.
Yeah.
Can I just add on the smaller business side of things? We had an innovation conference in October, and that it was definitely an anxiety that came out from our members, particularly the bigger members, that sort of this is all right for us, but how can we support the SMEs in our sector through this transformation, because it's huge. And the SMEs in the sector, also the supply chain for the bigger businesses that will often subcontract to them to enable them to flex up and down with capacity. So it's very live conversations that answer, as far as I'm aware of yet, of how to manage that. But we do know some of our members, larger members, are doing work with smaller companies, whether they're their supply chain or not, to help upskill them in the digital space. I was also very interested to hear in the budget the pilot that the Chancellor announced about helping small businesses benefit from AI. So we'll be looking at that carefully and seeing if that was something that would benefit our members.
Okay, yeah. Okay, gentlemen, back to you, Chair.
Oh, do you want to come in?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I've got a couple of focus questions for you with answers, hopefully. But very firstly, Chris, I'm going to just bring you up on the point you said about you look forward to it's, I think the word you used was critical for government intervention. I'm sure you'd like government funding, but I'm not sure you want regulation from government, and surely you want a laissez-faire attitude. It's very, very quick answer.
Okay, really quick answer. Where we see government support is with supporting people and skills. So not actually actively involved in industry regulation, unless we need it, but not at all. But it's the help in our coastal communities. How do we create those jobs, those skills needed?
I just thought I'd give you the chance to come back on that one. So very interesting. I don't want to take off on too many tangents, but I'm very interested in supply chain, agri-tech, and how improvements can be made to profitability or affordability or savings to be made and passed up and down that supply chain. So can you give me some examples where data and tech has helped make improvements in any supply chain that you're aware of, any examples, and how you think that might well happen in the future, either extrapolating that or, as you've all said, the importance of data as we move forward?
I mentioned that report that we in Oxford Economics put out last year. There were other case studies in there on using AI to optimise energy consumption. So logistics companies already in the electric space, using the electric vans, using technology and data just to make sure that their energy and journey management was as efficient as it could be. There's lots of work around aggregating data that's collected from different vehicles to enable informed choices.
Are any companies leading that, or any particular academics looking at that that you're aware of? You don't have to tell us now if you don't know.
Yes, I can write to the committee about that. There's a company that was mentioned to me recently that I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but it was when I was speaking to another business about large fleet management and how they get around the fact that they've got they've got a mixed fleet, different manufacturers produce different vehicles, so the data is produced in different ways. They want to download it in a way to understand what their fleet is doing and how they can optimise that, just looking at marginal efficiency gains. But they then use an aggregating platform to get that data in the same format.
Steve?
Yeah, if you'll allow me a real example. So until recently I was running Airport Rail in Doncaster and got a little bit fed up very early on in seeing half-empty trains coming in, and it's all very well having 6 trains a day, but when they're half empty, it's not such a great thing. And out of that was born what we now see as RailX, which is a digital booking app, and it allows accessibility to people that didn't previously have accessibility, that only want to use the railway for 1 or 2 a week or whatever. I can honestly say with my hand on my heart that innovation put a good 15 to 20% on my bottom line, and that of the FOC as well, whose trains we were filling. We're now moving that out beyond Airport Rail to other places. So the use of data and accessibility to that data through that hub has allowed greater efficiencies and more revenues for people. So, and where we're going with that is that we'd like to see us introducing dynamic pricing, which is going to be good for the industry, allowing lorry drivers who are doing the final mile, for example, to give a price for that final mile and get paid immediately, which then allows us to bring in incentivizations for them to reduce their costs as well. So it's about reducing costs across the whole port-to-door journey, and adding in efficiencies into
I like the sound of that, and especially dynamic pricing, but don't take the route that Channel Tunnel do, which use their algorithms to increase everybody's prices for various different rail journeys. But
it's a real example.
Chris, coming over to you.
I was just going to give some examples, really, of some of the stuff that's happened around innovation and data since the Maritime 2050 report. And there's a big focus on that, about creating these maritime sort of innovation spaces, these innovation hubs. Well, since 2019, there's now one at the Port of Tyne. Maritime UK Solent have one. There's a virtual one at Liverpool John Moores University. There's an awful lot of work happening in Northern Ireland with the whole Artemis project. And even its foil technology, the amount of data they use for that is incredible. Data is really interesting because we never quite realise or understand what we can use it for. There's a certain company I know, and I will write to the committee about this, that uses the bottom of ships get really kind of dirty with stuff, and therefore they don't glide through the water, they burn more fuel. These things can drop off in different waterways, and then you have an invasive species. And they've invented, it's basically a big hoover, it's the size of a mini, and it goes up and down these huge ships while they're loading and unloading, and gets rid of everything. And it pumps water that's cleaner than drinking water back into the ocean. And it's a non-UK business, it's from the Southern Hemisphere. And the data they're getting off the sludge they're getting off the bottom of ships is incredible. It's talking about environmental challenges, it's talking about security. It's actually, where has that ship been? Actually, are they telling us the truth? They say they've been there, but according to data, it's been there. So data is really, really interesting, and that is a live project now.
Thank you for that. That sounds very like barnacles on the boat that we have in politics. But just one last question, Chairman. You mentioned earlier on, Steve, about, and obviously Chris did, about Liverpool, and I'm aware that there really does need to be a direct east-west link, maybe between the eastern ports, the 4 ports at Immingham, at Hull, and over to Liverpool, and obviously the benefits that would happen. And it touches on what Chris was saying earlier. How do you think that could happen? What's the data telling you? And how beneficial would it be to the country's economy or the region's economy? But who should pay is my question. Are you saying the government should pay, the taxpayer ultimately? Or actually should some of the bigger companies pay, but with the smaller companies being able to access that rail route and obviously access the profits that will come from having a cheaper way of transporting goods?
I think in terms of what the data's telling us at the moment, we're getting quite a lot of inquiries, increasing inquiries about that route that joins the east to the west. The debate about configuring that route and getting it up and running again has been going on for some time, particularly within the rail industry. Who pays for it? I think it's something that has to be done for the UK economy. Who pays for it? I think is probably a question that can best be answered. It's across industry. I think government has a role to play in it. But I think there's also a role for the private sector as well, particularly at either ends of the journey, as it were. So there's got to be investment from across the board, I think.
Before I come to you, Chris, I'm going to let Ben have a go, because otherwise I'll just come after you, because I know you'll have lots to say.
I was just going to add, I think there is interest in the sector in joint funding of infrastructure. the key, I mean, it's not so much the data thing, the key thing is certainty and knowing what the plan is and getting involved financially in it if it's going to actually happen. I know we've seen examples before where companies have invested in planning, beginnings of infrastructure around connecting with the railway, and then the scheme, the national scheme that they were assuming, relying on happening, didn't happen. So it always comes back to certainty on this public-private relationship piece.
Would you say the data is a no-brainer from what you know?
On that question, we speak to our friends in rail-focused trade associations and other stakeholders, and they want to see that happen.
Thank you. Chris? Last but definitely not least.
Well, I think this is probably where I have to say, this is my personal opinion, not the opinion of Maritime UK or any associated organisation or individual, because obviously you can tell from my accent I used to be based in Liverpool, and I was actually in Humber last week. Of course I'm going to say yes, absolutely. We need that cross-rail link, not just to get stuff off the roads, not just to have movement of freight, but also to open up the whole middle bit of the UK to allow them to export, better connectivity, create more jobs. So I know when I used to be based in an organisation in Liverpool, and it was one of our big champion focuses with our colleagues in Humber, and the data is there. And that would be an example of industry government collaboration to make it happen, because the benefit will be a huge multiplier for the UK. I also think it's worth thinking there's certain port footprints in Asia that are bigger than the east-west train line. So we worry about, it's a train line, yeah, but there's bigger port footprints in Asia that are bigger than that. And we can do it, we should do it.
Thank you.
Thank you. We've focused primarily this morning on the domestic side of logistics, but of course many supply chains are international. Are there any barriers or opportunities in the sharing of data across borders to maximise the efficiency of the global chains?
Well, we've seen challenges in global shipping of concerns around sharing to the extent that it could be, problems with competition that could impact prices on the domestic side. I think what a database exercise that we're doing with our members, or providing to our members at the moment, is to better understand shipping surcharges that come with different circumstances. It's born around the Red Sea disruption, so they can understand at quite a granular level the prices being added for those diversions, what is fair and what is not fair. We're not making a judgment at the moment on fairness, but we just want to make sure that those in the UK that are paying for that can get a good view of what the likely cost would be and that sort of thing. But that's sort of the limit of our work in that.
I was thinking more of are there in other jurisdictions regulations about what data can be shared that inhibits that pooling across the whole supply chain?
Not a question that I'm equipped to answer.
Bruce?
With that, Chair, I will speak to one of our members, the UK Chamber, on that and write back with a definitive answer on that, if I may. But in addition to the answer I gave a little earlier, I think security, we have to be really aware of this with data.
Thank you. Steve, do you
have I mean, the only thing I can offer is that I think from a pan-European perspective, and I'm talking rail here because that's what I know, there does seem to be far more cooperation cross borders in terms of data sharing. So I think there's something there that could be looked at. I don't know too much about it, but there does seem to be a lot of cross-border cooperation and sharing of data.
Thank you. Greg.
Thank you, Chairman. Morning, gentlemen. Usual for transparency, it's not a declaration of interest, but I also chair the all-party group for road freight and logistics, as well as sitting on this committee. Can we turn to the skills agenda, because across the whole logistics sector there is a lot going on already. Generation logistics, you've got all sorts of schemes, as well as the government boot camps that we saw to try and improve recruitment and retention in the sector. Then we've got this agenda coming in where advanced digital and data skills. How prepared is the sector from apprentices coming in to ongoing training, ongoing upskilling of the workforce, potentially having to bring others in? Is the sector to actually be future-proofed for all of this, and how is it going to complement those existing programs like Generation Logistics get there?
I'd say, like all sectors, there's a lot more to do in that space, and the sector's very, very open to that. I've only been at Logistics UK for just over a year, and focus on skills not just in terms of immediate shortages but future needs, and the focus on innovation and how that's going to transform. The sector has increased even in that time. But I think it would be foolhardy of any sector to say they're ready and future-proofed. I think there's a recognition that what the sector needs to do is keep collaborating over the challenges, keep sharing insights about how to do innovation. So, for example, one of our working groups, that's one of the topics on the agenda: how to transform a business to do innovation, not just in terms of the technology, but organisational structure. What does that mean for skills? What experiences they've had with that? How have colleagues reacted to changes? It's a huge agenda, and I think it's more of a continual process than sort of establishing a fixed plan and sticking with it. I think they just all know, the sector all knows there's a lot of change going on.
I guess my follow-up to that is around this retention point. Certainly in road freight, retention is, put it mildly, a challenge at the moment. When a job changes so fundamentally, and all of a sudden, I don't want to sound like a Luddite here, but the job becomes entirely different because of digitisation, because of the change in what just the working day looks like. Where do all three of you think retention is going to be as a result of the shifting sands here? Is it going to bring the logistics sector to even greater crisis points on retention, or is that going to be a 5-year shift, a 10-year shift, a 50-year shift? What's going to happen there?
From our members, I think that they would come at it from a slightly different angle, that there's a huge amount of opportunity to work with colleagues on the change, and that this isn't a case of importing into a business wholly new ways of doing things from a technology piece, putting it on the floor and going, right, we've changed overnight now, do you still like the job? It's more about bringing colleagues into a broader conversation about how to maximise revenue, efficiency, decarbonisation, create really interesting jobs. So I think that's how they're thinking about it, but it's early days, and there are also aspects of retention that the sector is continually focused on that aren't really about technology, like driver facilities, for example, which are a significant problem in terms of improving the work experience of the experience of being a driver, and attracting people into those roles. Aging population is obviously it's something that the sector is focused on and thinking about its future. But in terms of change, I think from the members we've spoken to about it, it's about getting their heads around the opportunities and collaborating with colleagues on making those opportunities real.
Helpful. Chris or Steve, do you have thoughts on that?
I think the observation I would make, there's a demographic challenge, I think, across the logistics sector that we're all facing, and as businesses change because they have to in terms of embracing technology and using more data, I think they've got to also embrace the challenge that brings to attract younger people, people that are more dynamic in terms of their views on data and the use of it in the workplace. And so if they do that, then the retention issue should resolve itself, I think, in time. But it needs help, and it needs the industry to get on board and think along those lines. Instead of advertising jobs for the here and now, this is what we're doing today. They need to be thinking about the future and how that job is going to change in time because of the technology that's coming on board.
What this point about the time scale? We are where we are.
Yeah.
How long is the transition within the logistics sector to actually, be in that happy place that you described, where people are comfortable with the changed role, and we're not constantly staring down the barrels of a retention crisis?
I think if businesses were to start today, then we're looking at least 5 years, I think, at least 5 years to get it to where you'd want to be. But that means starting today. So.
Yeah, with generation logistics, the younger age group starts with young teenagers to try and get them interested in the role, and obviously so it's a decade or more potentially before they're in those roles. The sector needs to be focusing on that long-term pipeline of attraction. And also, as we will make clear, we're part of Generation Logistics to those interested in supporting it. It's not about the day-to-day job vacancy situation. The economy isn't growing either at all or very fast at the moment, and that has an immediate impact on the logistics sector, which is kind of an early barometer of how the economy is in terms of demand. And as a result, at the moment, the sector isn't feeling a driver shortage. It is feeling a technicians shortage for repairs, but there is also a significant concern that obviously everyone wants the economy to pick up, but that could expose a driver shortage. But our point is, generation logistics and initiatives like that aren't for that time frame. They're for 10 or so years.
Anything to add, Chris? Or
just a point, really, that unfortunately the vast majority of seafarers who service the UK are no longer British. So I know we keep saying 95% of our stuff comes to the UK. Well, we don't have as many merchant seafarers as we used to, and that's a real. I lie awake at night worrying about that. That's my big worry, because if I think there are things we can do. It's a career for life, and the challenge is we're going through. We have to be, aware of this. Aware of how important the maritime sector is. I have numerous different council members who will all have a different opinion on this. However, we have to encourage more people to come into our industry, and it is changing. If I'm a youngster, do I want to spend years at sea again, or years at sea? Well, possibly not. However, you talk about data connectivity, and it's a job for life, and things are evolving and changing. Just building on Ben's point, we've developed, actually DFT led, that we support the Maritime Skills Commission, which has come up with some really good reports on how we support our seafarers and also our onshore, attract onshore workforce. You'll get a feel that it's all the same sort of problems. Aging workforce, how do we attract them? And this goes back to almost the very early conversations. How do we better connect and better work together as subsectors of the logistics chain?
Helpful.
Fabian.
Thank you, Chair. Ben, hello.
Hello.
Can I ask you, because you gave written evidence to us, and in that evidence you said that to further develop data-enabled technology, the UK's 5G network would need some improvements, and I think we all know that, those of us that have got 5G. I wondered how urgent you think is the need to upgrade or enhance the 5G network. Is it being done? Is it desperate? And is it actually going to pose a real challenge in your sector?
I wouldn't say it's desperate. I think there is an assumption that some of the technologies that the sector wants to make more use of in the future, or see happen in the future, particularly in autonomous vehicle space, will increasingly rely on that kind of technology. And we're just making the point that if autonomous vehicles pick up and the logistics sector can establish the business case for using them, which is, I'd say, probably the main challenge for the sector, that the UK's infrastructure, including from a data connectivity point of view, is ready as well.
Are there signs that work is currently being done? Is your industry pushing the providers to enhance their 5G networks?
I'd say in that space we're probably, fair to say, more of the conversation is how to establish whether the business case works for autonomy and autonomous vehicles before we sort of push on complaining to others to get their houses in order. For us, the logistics sector needs to establish in the transition from I think, so on the autonomy point of view, I think there is an assumption that if it happens on a large scale, that the transition from a drivered vehicle to a completely driverless vehicle is gradiated. And that is recognised in the bill going through, that it's not an overnight switch. But for the logistics sector to invest significantly in new technology, they always find difficult because of the small margins in the sector. There would need to be a significant cost saving that goes with that, and the obvious cost saving in that transition is not having a driver or doing the people side of it very differently at the unloading and loading end, for example, rather than in the vehicle. And that is how to potentially unlock the business case. Whereas if you've got the expensive autonomous vehicle and someone sitting in it and paid to be an employee throughout the journey, and it's also encumbered by driver's hours rules, then that's a much harder bridge to cross. And I think the sector is more thinking in that space at the moment than concentrating on making the case to others to improve the infrastructure.
Yeah, you and I were in a meeting on Monday discussing autonomous vehicles.
Yes.
A very comprehensive meeting, but nobody mentioned the ability of the data network or the possibility of upgrading to 6G. I don't even know if that's being discussed. Nobody mentioned that as an integral part of the case for autonomous vehicles. No,
and I think we're also hearing from some in the autonomous vehicle space, data manufacturing space, that they're looking for solutions or developing solutions that aren't as reliant on that technology as maybe we would assume. So we need to see how that plays out. I thought it was a really interesting meeting. Listening to Waymo talk about how they do it in designated areas. So again, if we're thinking, if autonomy becomes something that works in very designated areas rather than generally, that has a different implication for infrastructure. Potentially a very different implication for logistics, that maybe it's something that the sector looks to invest in terms of trunking the movement between depots and ports, but not as a general technology. So I think it was from a public sort of spending point of view, or private investment for public good point of view, it's potentially too early to think about upgrading all of the national infrastructure to support a broad autonomy. We don't know if that will happen.
I saw you nodding your head there.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm not an expert in this area, but my instinct and my observation would be that if we are to deliver all of the data accessibility that we're talking about here today and the technological advances that we would hope to see come on board, I think the creation of 5G pretty much everywhere is essential. I can't see how, in the same way that we would need more power if everyone went electric tomorrow with all their vehicles, we'd need to produce more power. It's the same argument as far as I'm concerned. So I would say, yes, essential.
You need to...
No, I just echo the connectivity point.
Let me move on then to my next question, Richie, really, which is about the research that shows that people in the industry, but people outside too, have various worries about digital technologies in freight, ranging from reduced job satisfaction to breaches of privacy. We've already touched on that, and security. Now, what work is going on in your sector to address these challenges?
The anxiety point of view.
The anxiety and privacy, anxiety about privacy and security. Because the more data there is out there, the more likely it is to be breached by people who want to do harm.
I think that sort of the point I was talking about at the very beginning about the highly competitive nature of the sector, and that is one of the things that inhibits sort of horizontal data sharing across the sector and everyone having access to the data, is that companies are competitive. They vertically share data to make sure to deliver real efficiencies for their customers, and they are very customer focused. And I think that leads to a high amount of trust of amongst customers, that they are working not with a holistic database. They are buying something from a retailer, and they are choosing when they get to the end of the process, sometimes which logistics provider is going to deliver it to their door, which is easier to get one's head around in terms of trust than something where there is a significant amount of data sharing. And that's why I was sort of making the point, one of the reasons I was making the point, that it could be more fruitful in this space to think about shared challenges, public challenges, private challenges, and aggregating and corralling the data that is needed to solve those challenges, rather than taking a data-first approach of sharing and then seeing what can be done with it. Take a challenge-first approach, and then we'll be able to make clear to our members, but also the public, what we're doing this for and what the benefits are.
Well, the attitude towards the job itself, that in fact there'll be less job satisfaction if those jobs are more data-based.
Well, it's similar to the point we were talking about earlier. I think this, the sort of technology and database transitions is something that's affecting all sectors. So logistics isn't unique in that. It is very technology and data driven to deliver efficiencies. And what we're talking about with our members is the innovation journey that those that have sort of embarked on this are going through, how their colleagues have reacted to that, how they're bringing colleagues in for sort of discussion around the implications of doing things in a new way. They're looking at engagement with colleagues as an opportunity to collectively transform, knowing that nobody's got all of the answers. So whilst there is sort of commentary at a broad level about technology will lead to certain jobs disappearing or issues in that space, I think when we talk to our members, they're more thinking about how we're going to transform, how do we fund it, how do we work with our colleagues on that, what's that going to do to our business models, and it's at a broader, slightly more collaborative level.
You finding the same, Chris?
I was thinking then, again, I think it goes back to demographics, and generally as an industry we tend to be much older sort of demographics. We do have a skills shortage. It tends to be the next generation plus who are far more tech native than actually, perhaps I'll probably be quite rude than a lot of people in this room.
Good expression. Is that one you've made up? Or
well, no. What is it? It's tech native. I'm a tech immigrant. I was told the other day because I'm new to it, and I'm kind of learning my way. Just had to switch the computer on. So I think there's far less fear, and I think as an industry we have to innovate and quote unquote tech up, because that actually will attract the next generation. They speak the language of the skills that we are developing for tomorrow. So I'm less concerned. We do an awful lot of work with the industry on this, especially with Nautilus Union. And of course there's natural concerns of people working within the industry, that it's change, etc., etc. But I actually think the initial work, and instinctively, I can't see lack of jobs. I can see a different type of jobs. And we're going to need these people anyway, next generation. So I'm fairly positive about that.
Steve, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would. I think there's two elements to this. I think one is the concerns that there are around commercial sensitivities about sharing data, clearly, and I think that's partly a technology answer and partly a trust answer, which I think Ben alluded to. I think the other thing, we don't employ a huge amount of people, but I think I would certainly agree with what Chris has said, is that there are different types of jobs that are coming up, So that yes, there will be change. Yes, there will be concerns within a certain demographic, but they will be replaced by better jobs and more technology-based jobs, I think, going forward.
And you're confident of that?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. And for a final set of questions this morning, turn to Gavin.
Thanks so much, Chair. In other inquiries we've heard, and certainly my opinion, we've heard the government and DfT is very siloed itself. There's no overarching transport strategy. Each mode is very siloed within government. I think, Steve, you referenced earlier that obviously the sectors are siloed, and I think you mentioned perhaps looking at to incentivise either through regulation or what have you, bringing some of that together. So it's not really a huge surprise that the logistics and freight sector aren't actually really directly mentioned in the transport data strategy. There's obviously references to data and whatnot in a number of strategies, whether it's Maritime 2050 or the freight strategy, etc. And I suppose, given I've referenced you, Steve, I'll come to you first. Does the government's approach, and I think I know the answer to this from yourself, but if you could elaborate somewhat, approach to the sector, feel like it's joined up and focused, and what would you do to improve it in more detail?
I think the answer is no. It doesn't feel that way anyway.
What a feeling.
I think in terms of what it could do, I think we were talking about this in the corridor earlier on. There is an opportunity, I think, for, and we perhaps need to do this in a more collaborative way, and that is to join forces to maybe form some sort of committee that will take the industry forward. So a cross-sector committee involving rail, maritime, road, that can help government to take the industry forward. So something of that ilk, I think, is what's required. Just to promote that cross logistics thinking that needs to happen, to make sure that investment is put in the right places for the industry, not for rail, not for road, not for maritime per se, but for the logistics industry as such. Because it is, I mean, I've been in the rail industry a long time, and there's no doubt that the industry's changed and is changing. And I think there's a need for the logistics side of the business to work closer together rather than the silos that it's been working for the last 30, 40, 50 years or whatever. It's not us against them, it's all of us together to get the best answers for the UK, for this country.
You think that's in part industries to blame and part of government's to blame for that?
Yeah, I think it is. I think there have been obviously there's lots of commercial sensitivities about those sorts of things, but I do think the industry's been to blame largely. I think government's been to blame somewhat in maybe not paying as much attention to it as they could have over the years. So that I think, but there are answers there, and there is a solution to it, and I think it is for us to work more collaboratively together going forward to get the right answers.
As a committee, we're looking at coming up with recommendations coming out of this investigation. Obviously, Ben, Logistics UK would seem to be in a good position to try and draw some of these industries or modes together. So I suppose, if you answer the original question, but how much has this fragmentation impacted the sector's ability to actually move forward with this?
I think it is an issue. I'll answer if you don't mind, answer your first question first. But on the government side of things, I think you can imagine a time when having a more modal perspective in government wasn't significantly problematic. But there's a huge amount of change going on at the moment, driven by decarbonisation, driven by the technology revolution, driven by our changing trading relationships in the world and sort of geopolitics that mean, and in moments of change it's really important to be focused and sort of all work together. Within the Department for Transport, they've, I think, recognised the challenges of some sort of siloed thinking around modes. That led to the Future of Freight Plan part and the Freight Council, which is cross modes. So there is work going on in that area. I don't think anyone would say it's finished, but for us, the Department for Transport isn't the only department that needs to be in the tent on this agenda in terms of in delivering the Future of Freight Plan and other strategic policies for our sector. Department for Energy Secure and Net Zero is really key in terms of energy infrastructure. Obviously, for most sectors, education is two, education skills, and if we look at the trade side of things, we've got Department for Business and Trade, but in terms of import controls that are coming in across this year, that's handled between Cabinet Office, DEFRA and HMRC as well, so it's quite bitty. And we produced what we call our manifesto in January with the expectation there'll be a general election this year setting out key priorities for the sector, and the top ask in that was a dedicated minister for logistics with cross Whitehall responsibilities. And there is a minister in the Department of Transport, Mr. Opperman, who would say that he leads on logistics. What we need is whoever, we haven't said that where they should sit in the government, but whoever has that responsibility needs to be supported potentially by the Cabinet Office to deliver across Whitehall, because it's not just in the Department for Transport.
So that's your kind of manifesto-ish, that's what you would like to see happen. Yeah. Is there anything happening at the moment in terms of drawing any of that kind of strategic approach to data usage across the sector? Is there anybody, either within private sector or in government, drawing those strands together at the moment, however effective or ineffective that might be?
Yeah, so from a government side, the Freight Council, which is DFT-led and cross-sector on it too, is trying to join the dots there. There's a DESNES decarbonisation focus committee that brings freight into that too. I think there are efforts to join.
How much is data part of that?
On the data side of things, I think it's in much more in the space around establishing priorities at strategic level that the government and the sector want to see happen, rather than in sort of data-focused initiatives. On the private sector side of things, we seek to, and we're on a journey at Logistics UK to seek to represent the whole of the logistics sector, but we do that through a mix of working with a membership that is cross-modal, but also working collaboratively with other trade associations that aren't in our membership, to make sure that we are sort of sharing and trying to speak with one voice. And we think that's really important, given the point you made about all of the change happening, the need for and the role that logistics plays underpinning the economy. It's really important that our sector speaks as far as possible with one voice about what it needs to see happen to ultimately unlock more economic growth.
Okay, thanks. Chris, you get anything to add before I come to you on smart shipping?
Just a moment. It's interesting because logistics and maritime almost mirror each other. So of course we have our own maritime council at DFT. We have our own maritime minister, shipping and aviation. We have our own maritime department at DFT. And just on the sort of data bit, and it's something I mentioned a little earlier, we now have an AI task and finish group with a focus on maritime. Of course, collaboration can always be better, and I say that probably talking about my own industry of maritime. We could always work better together. But I also think it is worth remembering the strides, certainly in maritime, that have happened in the last decade. Certainly not just with the Maritime UK National Council, the industry come together, the collaboration with DFT and DBT. And as Ben said, Logistics UK are on a journey. Actually, probably our maritime sector is also on a journey. So I'm probably, you might have guessed, I tend to lean a little bit towards optimism.
Balances out my.
I was going to say, it's why we'll get on. But yeah, I'm optimistic.
Okay, well, despite you using the phrase "better together," which is triggering for me, if I could turn attention to for the last question to smart shipping. So the government has grand aims, and I think in 2019 it said it wanted to be world leading in the design, manufacture, uptake, and use of smart shipping technologies. Is this currently the case? And if not, how far along in that particular journey are we?
Of course, I'm going to say we're world leaders. Of course I am, because I genuinely actually think we are. You know, as far as blue investment is concerned, the UK is number one globally for private sector looking to invest in maritime innovation technology. I think there's you know, we're sort of playing a little bit of catch up with all the other big industries in the UK, whether it be aviation or rail. But we've gone from zero as far as innovation support to the 206 million from government just a few years ago. And as an industry, we've more than matched that. I think there are some really good technologies out there. We're talking about smart shipping and smart maritime. I've touched upon the Artemis project in Northern Ireland. You have the likes of the whole offshore energy opportunity, and the windmills are one thing, but it's the vessels needed to service those windmills, and these things can cost 50-60 million pounds a pop. We're going to need 50 of them in the UK over the next 10 or 15 years, and we should be building them here. We should absolutely be building them here. And some of the projects we're looking at, the Bibby Marine are looking to create the first net zero one of these vessels, service vessels, here in the UK, and so of course I think we have an opportunity with the global net zero agenda, especially with offshore energy, not only to secure our own energy but also to lead that industry. And of course there's numerous other examples I can give you.
In terms of smart shipping, or what progress has been made in establishing the centre for smart shipping?
Of what, the UK?
At the centre?
What I've seen, I think a benefit of the UK, and perhaps also a challenge, is that we have some really good universities. We have some hubs around the UK. And what some of the work we've been doing at MUK is this hub and spoke approach. So there's clearly different universities with different expertise which will work together for maritime. I think we genuinely do have some world-leading universities. I've talked about the University of Southampton, everything that's going on in Strathclyde, really pushing the envelope forward. But there's also real appetite as well by the industry. Don't forget, we're under pressure to get to net zero quickly, but all, you know, because we have a duty to do that, and the appetite is there, and we have the will, the knowledge, and actually the educational establishments to do that.
There's also, it's not just the HE sector, the FE sector as well. So I visited the very impressive setup at Glasgow College that with the simulators and whatnot they've got there, and that was...
Glasgow College is great. We had an event there a couple of years ago, I think for COP. It's fantastic. It's absolutely fantastic. And there's some great engineering colleges, maritime engineering colleges throughout the UK. So no, absolutely.
And I suppose from a port point of view and handling that, I mean, clearly your Felixstows and Southamptons will have to and are investing significant sums in keeping up with everybody else, because obviously data is going to become hugely important in that side of things. There are smaller ports, and I'm not going to name owners or what have you, but there are some port owners who are better at investing than others. Would be all I would posit at this point. What impact do you think that might have on those ports that are perhaps not being invested in from a logistics point of view, with the data-driven future in mind?
Data-driven future. So I'd probably go back to my earlier comment and say...
You can name them if you want.
No, I don't want to name them. I have no idea on this one. I'll take the fifth. But I think, you know, ports are key drivers of coastal communities, and we don't realise how much poverty and deprivation are in our coastal communities, you know, and don't just think about inner cities, think about the likes of, where I'm from, Birkenhead, you know, they're tough places. You're talking about Glasgow, tough places. And ports are the drivers there. So anything that strengthens the opportunities for the port to grow and drive business is a good thing. And data connectivity is critical for them.
Okay, thanks. And just one last question for you all. In terms of whether UK is a Is we're leading in the development of data-enabled technologies in the wider logistics sector? If you have thoughts on that, but also if you could leave us, if there's one thing, one recommendation that you could write for this committee from this inquiry, what would it be? I'll start with Ben.
Sure. So on the recommendation side of things, if I could have two. It would be
into politics with that sort of greed, but
getting on with the identification of the national freight network, using data at macro level to identify the key freight routes in the country to inform infrastructure from a transport and energy perspective. And the other one, I think, continued support for the future the Freight Innovation Fund. Which has established a really useful model for setting challenges and bringing the tech companies, investors, and the logistics sector together to work on new innovations that can be really great for the UK logistics sector, but also great for the broader tech community too, in terms of the UK being an innovation centre. Sorry, would you mind me of your first question?
It was just about where you think the UK is world leading in the development of data-enabled technologies in the wider logistics sector.
I think the e-commerce space, and the UK is very advanced in that area, and very customer focused. And whatever we do in this space in terms of sharing and coming up with collaborative solutions, it's really important that we sort of maintain the integrity of competition as well, to maintain that customer focus.
So Steve, you're one, or maybe two if you're quick, in terms of recommendations that you would...
My one is really about collaboration for me across the sector. I think that's the way forward for us, and if government can in any way provide some targeted regulatory incentivisation to allow the industry and the sector to work together more closely, then I think that's the one I would go with.
Chris?
Focused on the people. That's where everything starts and stops for me. That's this supports your skills challenges, your career gateways. It supports your food and energy security. Just focus on the people, and how do we attract and support next generation in our industry. We're an island nation, and we need people to run this island nation to make sure stuff comes and goes.
Thanks so much.
Oh, did you still have a quick...
I did, Chairman and panel. I was going to come back because my colleague I thought would be more negative than he perhaps normally is about the government. I was going to ask you, what has the government done well that you'd like to see it carry on doing or do even better? But actually quite a lot of you have answered that already, so I don't, unless there's anything you want to add that, because I'm an optimist, much like you and Mick. We're all three plastic scousers, and that makes us optimists, I think. So I don't know if there's anything you want to add. If not, then that's fine.
You have to be. You have to be.
On that point of violent agreement, I think we'll draw proceedings to a conclusion. Can I thank all of you very much indeed for your time and evidence this morning. They're very helpful for our inquiry. Order.
Thank you.
Has ended. The proceeding 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 has ended.